What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is a LazyDaze channel and we're back at it again with some more history reaction for you guys today, and we're back on some extra credits content for you. And today is the history of England, Agincourt, extra history part 5. We really enjoy this type of content over here. It's a little bit more comedic, shorter content, so it's bit easier to sort of retain the information, and again we just like seeing the different type of content creators telling the different type of stories. So if you guys haven't already, head over to ExtraCredits page, a link will be in the description box down below. If you guys are enjoying our content, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But we are just going to jump straight into this one.
Let's do this.
Henry V is a serious contender for the most impressive man ever to rule England. In the words of a famous historian, Henry had, by the end of his reign, transformed the spirit of his own people and become the arbiter of Christian Europe, dwarfing emperor and pope. Contemporaries agreed. On his death, a chronicler wrote, "He did not leave his like upon earth among Christian kings or princes." Henry V was fiercely intelligent, focused, a brilliant military commander and strategist, frighteningly dynamic and energetic. His only fault was to die young. Well, that and being so horrifically ruthless and cold that another historian wrote of Henry that he was conclusive proof that a man may be a hero and yet a monster. Henry became king in 1413. He was fiercely pious and heard mass several times a day. He was also a ruthless advocate of religious unity. His father, the usurper Henry IV, had passed a law called De Heretico Comburendo, which means literally, heretics shall be burned. Henry V was equally determined to rub out any heresy, and in 1417 he would execute even his companion in arms, John Oldcastle, as a result. For medieval monarchs, the unity of the church was a divinely ordained responsibility, but it was also good politics. The church was far and away the most effective propaganda and communication device any medieval ruler could hope for. In the first 2 years of his reign, Henry made quite clear who was boss. He had a talent of creating a sense of collaboration, consultation and purpose amongst his great men, while being utterly ruthless with anyone who stepped out of line. Thus, as his army waited to sail for France in 1415, his very last act was to execute a man of royal blood, a grandson of the great Edward III, for trumped-up reasons of treason. Henry V always intended to make war on France. As far as he was concerned, he had been cheated of his birthright, as established by the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360, and if the French wouldn't give it to him, he would take it from them. So there. The French, meanwhile, had recovered their effortless arrogance, and in so many words, they informed Henry that his mother was a hamster and his father smelt of elderberries. Henry would show them they'd chosen the wrong guy to call the son of a hamster. In 1415, Henry appealed to English patriotism by repeating...
It's where the swallows, the African swallow and the European swallow,
Okay.
is from. It's from Monty Python.
I see.
Quest for the Holy Grail. My advice is you watch it. It's very
I've watched
funny.
a few. Like,
It's very
I've
funny.
watched Monty Python. It's just remembering all the bits. I haven't watched it for a long time.
so
It was when I was
good.
young.
So good.
in Edward III's charge that the French were trying to eradicate the English language. From now on, Henry made sure English was the official language of England. He even wrote open letters to his people in English. Of course, he backed that up by contracting 320 captains, and from the towns and villages all over England, archers and knights set out for Southampton to join their king. And in August 1415, an army of 12,000 left England. Henry tried one last letter to the Dauphin of France. It read, "Friend, give us what we are owed, and by the will of the Almighty avoid a deluge of human blood." Not sure he was serious about the friend thing. In France, the mad King Charles VI was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. But despite the squabbling of the royal dukes, the Dauphin managed to pull together a united front. And when Henry landed at the walls of Harfleur, he was in a dangerous position, exposed and vulnerable. At Rouen, just 50 miles away, the French army gathered. Capturing a base quickly was essential, but Harfleur fought heroically, and it was 6 long weeks before it finally agreed to yield. Harfleur's stubborn resistance gave Henry a further problem. It was now almost October. Medieval armies went home for winter. Supplying an army of any size through winter was practically impossible. But to go home after capturing one poxy castle was not in the playbook for either hero or monster. Obviously, marching all the way through French territory to Calais just to show the French that he could would be utterly daft. So that is, of course, what Henry decided to do. Just to make the message absolutely clear, he'd follow the route of Edward III and cross the river Somme at Blanche-Tac. As they marched north, the English army left a brown trail of poo behind them. Dysentery, the biggest killer of medieval warfare. camp fever, as it was called, and Henry's army had it in spades from the camps around Harfleur. They were weak, riven by illness, and really in no condition to fight. And so Henry played it safe, and he took a route to stay away from the Dauphin's army, gathering at Rouen. Sadly, the French were not blithering idiots and had learned from last time. They'd closed the ford at Blanchetaque. Once again, though, the English managed to find a way to cross the River Somme, but this time the French were already ahead of them. Near the village of Agincourt, as the English crested a rise, they were faced by the terrifying sight of the French just waiting for them. The disease-ridden English army was probably down to about 8,000 now, 6,500 of whom were lightly armed archers. Facing them was something like 15,000 heavily armed Frenchmen. Again, the French had learned the lesson of Crécy, and this time they waited overnight. The sound of their partying drifted over to the camp of the cold, wet and sick English. The following day, the French did not just charge, they waited. And so both armies waited as the rain poured down, soaking earth, clothes, bodies, staring at each other across a ploughed field. The French had a plan, and it did not include charging at the English to be mown down by arrows. The English had a plan. It involved the French charging at them and being mown down by arrows. Stalemate. Henry had to provoke a response. Mounted on a white horse, he gave the signal. English trumpets blared. "Now strike!" came the order. With the flash of a white baton, the whole army advanced to longbow range and unleashed a storm. Satisfyingly, the French panicked, forgot their plan, and attacked. The story is well known. The French attacked the English line over the mud of a ploughed field. As they came on, they were hammered by archers. When they arrived, they could barely stand in the mud, let alone fight, and they were hacked down. Henry would let nothing stand in the way of victory. Without ruth, he sent a body of 200 English archers to slaughter all the helpless French prisoners in the English camp, to show the French that Henry would stop at nothing to achieve victory. The French got the message,
Savage.
and they fled. The great men of France lay dead in the mud and the blood, all were captured. That night, as Henry celebrated at supper, the Dukes of Orléans and Bourbon were made to serve him. It was the ultimate humiliation. Great victory though it was, Agincourt was the opening of a war, not the end of it. In 1417, Henry was back with a new army, this time going city to city to make himself King of France. And city by city, northern France began to fall to his talent. At last, in 1418, after a 6-month siege, he captured the mighty Rouen, capital of Normandy, 70,000 people strong, half as big again as London. Against him, the French were now led by John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy.
That's
By
big
now,
numbers,
the Duke was
yeah.
almost richer and more powerful than the French monarchy itself. His court had become Europe's cultural centre, famed throughout Christendom. This made it difficult for the Dauphin to like or trust the Duke. No heir to the French throne likes to have a subject more powerful than he was, who might just take a shine to his throne. No Duke likes to feel that his monarch is jealous enough to cut his throat. This made conversations a little awkward, but they eventually agreed to meet on neutral ground, on a bridge between their two camps. The security arrangements were elaborate, and as it happens, rubbish. Because on the 10th of September 1418 on the bridge, Duke John the Fearless was hacked to death by the Dauphin's men. This was an act of breathtaking brutality and buttock-clenching stupidity.
Wow.
So buttock-clenchingly stupid, in fact, that when 100 years later the French King Francis I visited the priory where the skull of John the Fearless was held, he remarked, "Here is the hole through which the English entered France." John the Fearless's son was understandably miffed that his dad had been hacked to death, and there was only one man capable of wreaking the vengeance he thirsted for, Henry. So England and Burgundy agreed to replace the Valois dynasty with the Plantagenet dynasty as kings of France in the form of Henry V. The Anglo-Burgundian alliance was irresistible. England's steamroller controlled vast swathes of northern France, Normandy, Maine, Touraine, Anjou, and even Paris itself. The Dauphin was a washed-up has-been loser on the run. By 1420, the mentally ill Charles VI was forced to agree to an astounding Treaty of Troyes. By this treaty, Henry would be married to the king's daughter Catherine of Valois. Their children would be the heirs to the throne of France. In 1420, Henry and Catherine tied the knot. In December 1421, Catherine gave birth to their son, who would therefore be King of France. But while Henry had no military equal, camp fever was a challenge too far for him. And as he campaigned, dysentery caught up with him, and on August the 31st, 1422, he died. But he died only after having conferred with his brother, John, Duke of Bedford, about what should happen next, which was a good thing, because the new King of England was 9 months old and a good deal more interested in filling his nappies than ruling his new kingdom. Estes chapter 10 verse 16 was much quoted in the Middle Ages. "Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child." In France, minorities had often been disastrous. England's experience was very different. In Henry VI's minority, Henry V's two surviving brothers, John, the Duke of Bedford, and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, and a Regency Council were to guide England safely through the minority, until Henry VI assumed his place, and England was to wish that her king had never come of age at all. Bedford was the eldest of Henry V's sons. He was an impressive man, intelligent, a good diplomat, a strategist, and a decent military commander. To him was assigned the role of commander and governor of France. From his magnificent palace he built in Rouen and from Paris, Bedford ruled as much of France as had accepted Henry VI as king. Gloucester was a slightly different kettle of fish. He was surely loyal, intelligent and cultured, but he was also volatile and a populist. Parliament and the King's Council did not entirely trust him, so rather than be sole regent in England, Gloucester was made protector, head of the council only. Gloucester whined continually about this, but never to the point of rebellion. During the minority, the English strategy was to hold what they'd won, while making itty-bitty border raids into the rest of France, for defensive purposes only, of course. Meanwhile, Charles VI of France died in 1422, and his son the Dauphin became Charles VII. As the English held Paris, he had to set up his court at the ancient royal city of Chinon, south of the River Loire. The English-held France of Henry VI was organised for defence, with garrisons in key towns throughout Normandy and Greater Anjou. The inhabitants were part of the English administration. They submitted taxation to maintain their own defence. For 6 years, Charles got nowhere. In fact, at Verneuil in 1424, Bedford won as complete a victory as Agincourt and Crécy had ever been. England was once again blessed with talented commanders in men like Salisbury and Talbot. At Chinon, Charles VII's court was a despairing, depressed mess of defeatism. And then in 1428, something truly remarkable happened. The English were besieging the city of Orléans. First, a cannonball took the life of Salisbury, the best English commander. And then at Charles's court of Chinon, there appeared a French peasant girl. She claimed that God had sent her a vision to lead the French king to victory. Now, religious mystics were honoured in the Middle Ages, so although he saw no more chance of success than a snowball at a summer fete and gave her little or no support, Charles allowed her to travel to Orléans. Joan of Arc, or the Maid of Orléans, as she became known to history, did not lack for confidence.
Sorry to interrupt, David, but if our viewers want to know more about Joan, our patrons voted for a full series on her life, which will air right after this special series ends. So, you know, if you could just have no spoilers, though I guess there's no way to not spoil, so just, keep calm and carry on. I'll show myself out.
Against all expectations, Joan won round the hardened French soldiers trapped in Orléans and inspired them. They counter-attacked with the Maid of Orléans at their head, dressed in shining armour, and they threw the English from the siege. The English fell back in chaos and confusion. 3 critical English fortresses fell one by one. And then came the unthinkable. The hated, invincible English archers were ridden down and destroyed at the Battle of Patay. The spell had been broken. The English could be defeated. In the following year, 1429, there in the cathedral, in a blaze of glory, Charles followed his ancestors and was crowned King of France. And there was nothing Bedford could do to stop them. All he could do was watch in helpless fury. And then the Maid of Orléans turned on Paris itself. It had been the greatest comeback since Lazarus, but it was here that Joan's momentum was stopped. Within 6 months, Mr. Ark had been captured, and in May 1430 was burned as a heretic in Rouen. But she'd lit a fire the English couldn't put out. Her story is just incredible. Like any legend, there is much exaggeration that attached itself to her, but the sight of a peasant girl leading armies to war is astounding. And she transformed the war. From now on, the Anglo-Burgundian alliance was always on the defensive. In 1431, Bedford organised the coronation of the 9-year-old Henry VI in Paris as King of France. But although Bedford did his best to organise a new offensive, the English treasury was bare. The cost of maintaining these garrisons was bleeding England and her Burgundian allies dry. Now the Duke of Burgundy no longer believed England was capable of winning, and so a massive diplomatic conference was held in 1435. Hundreds of diplomats gathered every day from France, Burgundy and England in front of the papal mediator. England watched helplessly as Burgundy and Charles kissed, hugged, made up and agreed they were not scared of the English pig dogs and made a separate peace. It was a disaster for England. It drove the nail into the coffin of English-held France, hammered home by the news that Bedford himself was dead. In England, at the Palace of Westminster, Henry VI sat on his throne in the presence chamber and announced that he was now 15, the minority was ended, and he assumed his role as King of England. But Henry VI had little in common with his warrior father. Henry VI could have done with either a bit more hero or a good dose of monster, because as it was, he was better suited for the church than the throne. Henry VI was indecisive,
Choir
weak-willed,
boy?
he hated war and wanted only peace with France at any cost. For a while, the Duke of Suffolk, the king's chief advisor, tried to protect his young king. For 10 years, the war of attrition in France dragged on. England was outgunned and alone, but commanders like Talbot and Richard, Duke of York, fiercely held the line. Charles and Burgundy could not break the English grip on Normandy, Maine and Anjou. The logjam was finally broken by a truce of such stunning naivety that the mind literally boggles. Henry VI wanted peace and Henry VI wanted a wife. In 1445, it appeared that Suffolk had negotiated both. Henry's wife was to be Margaret of Anjou, a minor French princess, and King Charles of France gave some vague promises that he would come up with some suitable peace proposals. But to pay for the marriage, all of Maine and Anjou would have to be handed back to France. Obviously, this is a laughable proposal. Without the solid agreement of peace, no one would be stupid enough to give away 2 entire provinces. So you guessed it, this is exactly what Henry and Suffolk did. At first, no one in England understood what had happened. Margaret of Anjou became queen and the streets of London ran with wine as they celebrated. But by 1447, the streets of London ran with refugees from Maine and Anjou. King Charles had no new peace proposals, except permission to leave very quietly and give back everything Henry V had won. People began to understand what had been done in their name, what had been given away by Suffolk and Henry, and that English blood had been shed in vain. But now the levee was breached, the flood began. In 1450, the last battle in northern France took place at a village called Formigny. The English were slaughtered, and the last Englishman fled Normandy, never to return. The end in Gascony was not far behind. In 1453, England's last competent commander of the glory days, Talbot, died in the cannon fire of the Battle of Castillon. Bordeaux and Gascony finally fell to the French 300 years after Eleanor of Aquitaine had brought them to the Plantagenet dynasty. The immediate impact was political chaos. Suffolk had tried to hang on to power by having the outraged Duke of Gloucester seized and thrown into jail, where he died from a heart attack. But now Suffolk's enemies gathered and forced him from power. Henry tried to protect his loyal, hard-working servant. In this, he was not entirely successful. Suffolk's head was in fact found stuck on a pole on the beach and the rest of his body had a hard time enjoying life without it. Remarkably, political poems appeared directly attacking the king. Now this was exceptional. The king was God's anointed. He could do no wrong in the medieval world. Political criticism was always directed at the king's advisors. The enemies of Henry began to gather round the son of that man executed by Henry V in 1415, Richard, Duke of York. Very soon, the incompetence of Henry VI would launch England on 30 years of destructive civil war, known to history as the Wars of the Roses. So while the 100 Years' War and the English conquest of France came to a crushing end, in the longer view, in defeat was for England victory. The 116-year struggle helped define the English. English was now the official language and had helped build a joint sense of purpose in the nation. Geoffrey Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales made English for the first time acceptable as a language of culture. Richard III and Henry V had made it the language of government.
My guy.
During the religious wars of the 16th century, this sense of unity would enable England to defeat the mightiest armada Europe had ever seen. In France, the French kings were forced to centralise and tackle separatist forces, and by so doing, with the fall of the Dukes of Burgundy, France became the arbiter of Europe. And lastly, the later history of England is unthinkable with lands in France. With their continental ambitions crushed, England would turn to the New World, to the Caribbean, the Americas, the East, and create a commercial empire that would in turn make her the most powerful nation on earth.
Well then, I am definitely looking forward to finding out some more English history. I definitely know there's a few videos we need to get to and that we have on the list, but if you guys have any other suggestions, drop it in the comments box down below. If you guys enjoyed our reaction to this episode, I really enjoyed it, then like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we will catch you in the next video.
See you in a bit.